At the exact moment I nodded in agreement to the divorce, Francis was busy soothing his lover on the phone. Hearing my words, he looked up and said, "It's my fault. From now on, if you need anything, just ask. I'll help however I can." People envied us. Francis and I had fallen in love at 18, and I had married into wealth, becoming the quintessential socialite wife. But no one remembered that I had abandoned everything for him, moving to the South alone. When he married me, he knelt for a day and a night to win his mother's approval. What he didn't know was that there would be no from now on for us. Lowering my gaze, I glanced at the phone in my hand, which buzzed persistently with new messages. "When are you coming back to Beijing? I'll pick you up. Sarah." I meant what I said when I was 17. It'll hold true for a lifetime. Chapter 1. Fireworks bloomed, burst, and faded beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Since 2012, for 7 consecutive years, fireworks had illuminated the evening of July 24th, Francis's anniversary ritual. Each year, the fireworks display lasted exactly 15 minutes, a tribute to the fact that Francis and I had met at 15. Looking down from the window, I saw crowds of people who had heard the news gathering along the riverbanks, bustling with excitement. Those watching the fireworks kissed, embraced, and celebrated with joy events that were about me, yet no longer had anything to do with me. Inside, the dimly lit room felt distant. Across the long table sat a man in a sharp suit, tall and imposing. His features, illuminated by the glow of his phone screen, looked even more defined and striking. I watched him for a long time before speaking, my voice as soft and hazy as a distant fog. At last, I made myself clear. "I agree to the divorce. The joint application forms are filled out. Let's meet at the court first thing tomorrow morning." Hearing this, he lifted his head from his phone and looked at me. "Not today. Let's not talk about this today." I slid off my wedding ring and placed it on the table. "There's no day more fitting than today. From where it started, it should also end, here and now. Francis." He fell silent for a moment before standing and pushing back his chair. "Fine, I'll pick you up tomorrow morning." The house was large, and before he even reached the door, I heard him answer a call, his low voice comforting the person on the other end. "Yeah," she agreed. "All right. Wait for me at home." The door closed softly. As was typical of him, I stayed seated at the table, gazing silently out the window. Only when the last firework fell did I rise. My phone chimed with a cheerful notification. A light, elegant female voice rang out jubilantly. "Miss Bunny, today marks the 7th anniversary of your wedding to Francis. I'm sure you're still happily together, aren't you? So, what gift did he prepare for you this year?" "Let me guess. It's..." I reached out and silenced the event reminder, cutting the joyful voice short. Opening my phone without hesitation, I began the process of selling every property I owned. When I first came to Hong Kong, Francis had been meticulous in ensuring I felt secure. Back then, his mother didn't approve of me. She hadn't even attended our wedding. At the time, Francis had transferred everything he could to me, including 2 major properties. One of them was this flat, worth nearly 50 million Hong Kong dollars even back then. Later, after his father passed away, Francis took over Jinlong and grew the business exponentially. Periodically, he would purchase properties in my name and even set up a trust fund for me. He would often say, apologetically, "Sarah, you left everything behind to follow me here. I feel for you. I want to give you everything, but it never feels like enough." Back then, I would press my forehead against his and say, "Francis, I don't care about those things." After all, when I first met him, he was just a boy who would get into fights over a pair of $30 sneakers. I reassured him, "You've given me plenty. Even if you decide to leave me now, I wouldn't starve in Hong Kong." It turns out those words were prophetic. As husband and wife turned into strangers, I found myself with enough dignity and money to keep me from freezing on the streets during a cold winter. Chapter 2. The next morning, I arrived at the court registry 15 minutes early, driving myself. Francis, unusually, hadn't brought his chauffeur today. Instead, he pulled up in his black Cullinan. Once, his favorite car had been the Maybach I gave him, but when he used that car to drive Nicole, I smashed it to pieces. Francis, dressed in a black suit, was as striking as ever, his handsome face enough to make passers-by stop and stare. Looking at his face, I couldn't help but recall the day he proposed, kneeling on one knee with a ring in hand, crying so hard he could barely keep himself upright. It had been me who pressed my forehead against his, laughing as I said yes and reached out for the ring he held. Now, Francis noticed my dazed expression and instinctively grasped my hand. "Sarah, if you're having second thoughts, we can still." I abruptly pulled my hand away and stood calmly. "Let's go." He stood there for a moment, staring at his now empty hand. Then, clenching his fists slightly in the air, he followed me. Divorce was always a messy affair. Divorcing someone wealthy was even messier. In Hong Kong, divorces involved more steps and dragged on longer than they did on the mainland. There were no disputes over assets between Francis and me. The alimony of 3.6 billion Hong Kong dollars was his suggestion, and I had no objections. To avoid unnecessary complications, I had made some arrangements. We wouldn't have to wait 6 months. The decree would be issued today. 2 hours later, we were holding our divorce certificates. Francis stared at the paper for a long time, standing still until a staff member prompted him to step aside. He finally moved. Dazed. "I didn't realize you were in such a rush that you couldn't wait even a few months." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Aren't you the one who couldn't wait? You've been asking me to get this over with for months now." He pressed his lips together. I was drunk. I didn't see the point in revisiting the past and turned to leave. Francis instinctively followed. "What are your plans now?" I responded nonchalantly. "Work, dating, travel. I've got plenty of plans." "Are you staying in Hong Kong?" he asked. I stopped and looked at him squarely. "Francis, sometimes I think, if I only cared about your money, I could have held on to Mrs. Sue's title forever." "Sarah, I failed you, but whatever you need in the future, as long as I can, I'll take care of it for the rest of your life." I smiled faintly and didn't reply. As I stepped outside, Nicole was leaning against Francis's car, dressed head to toe in Chanel and wearing sunglasses. Around her neck was an unmistakable Tiffany necklace, an auction piece not yet released. Few would flaunt such extravagance in broad daylight. The moment she saw us, she rushed forward and clung to Francis's arm. Francis frowned, his tone curt. "Who told you to come?" Nicole, emboldened by his expression, retorted. "I came to see my boyfriend." "What's wrong with that?" Her gaze was unwavering as it landed on me. She hadn't dared to look at me like that before. In this circle, mistresses were common, but Nicole was different from the typical type who flaunted their brief moments of favor. She had always been cautious and submissive, willing to grovel if necessary. Once, I believed she would have knelt to polish my shoes if I'd let her. Years ago, she had sent me a recording, just 2 lines of her conversation with Francis. "Mr. Sue, I don't need you to be responsible for me. Just a little bit of your love is enough. If that's too much to ask, it's fine. Loving you is my business. I have the right and the freedom, don't I?" Back then, she had been just a small-time paparazzo in Hong Kong, staking out high-profile events to snap scandalous photos of the elite. It was at Jean Lung's 85th anniversary gala that she'd been caught sneaking in, her camera confiscated. Francis despised paparazzi. After his father's affair, they had hounded his mother relentlessly, chasing her car with cameras to capture her tears. That pursuit had caused his mother to lose the baby she was carrying. At that gala, Francis had looked at Nicole with disgust and ordered her and her magazine blacklisted immediately. But I had taken pity on her, a fresh graduate with a youthful, innocent face, struggling to make ends meet. I calmed Francis, urging him to let it go and not tarnish an otherwise good day. What I didn't know then was that this seemingly naive girl had long targeted Francis, spending exorbitantly to track his whereabouts. Even if I had known, I might have dismissed it with a smile. Back then, I had been so confident, so naive. I believed in the unshakable bond between Francis and me, that nothing, neither the collapse of the world nor the divide of life and death, could make him love anyone else. Besides, in a sea of glamorous actresses vying for mistress roles, Nicole was as plain as a glass of water. She had no leverage, but the Nicole standing before me was no longer that scruffy paparazzo. With Francis's backing, she had transformed into a television host. The public, unaware of the truth, praised her career, lauding her rise from a debt-ridden daughter repaying her father's loans to an independent, resilient modern woman. Chapter 3. Reversing out of the parking space. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nicole was clinging to Francis, her expression a mix of pleading and persistence. Inside the car, the Cantonese radio station played a classic song of the day. Anita Mui's deep, soulful voice filled the air. What we never have, what has already passed, always seems the most fitting. I pulled my gaze back to the road, my mind drifting to the year I first discovered their connection. I never used to check Francis's phone. That time was just an accident. Scrolling through, I saw messages Nicole had sent him, most of them unanswered. Except for one. Francis had replied to her. She had written, "Wow, a glass of wine costing $8,000? I can't imagine what it tastes like, liquid gold?" Francis's response was mocking, dismissive, ignorant fool. When I put his phone back on the table, Francis only chuckled. "Don't you think it's funny? Okay. He switched to Cantonese. "Don't get mad with me. I can't handle it. She's just trash. If it bothers you, I'll delete it." Back then, I hadn't known that when a man finds a woman amusing, it's the beginning of the end. I forgave him easily, merely blaming him for being a magnet for trouble, until one day, Nicole wistfully mentioned how she'd heard the view from Victoria Peak was unmatched, though she doubted she'd ever have the chance to see it. That night, Francis came home late, a rare occurrence. His crisp white shirt bore the faint trace of lipstick at the collar. I held that shirt in trembling hands, ears ringing, blood surging, until I finally collapsed to my knees. Retching uncontrollably, Francis knelt beside me, swearing that nothing had happened between him and Nicole. I cried so hard I couldn't stop shaking, demanding over and over, "Why? Why would you do this?" When he was 15, bruised and battered, he had kicked away the thugs following me without hesitation. At 17, he couldn't even afford decent clothes but saved meal after meal to buy me a necklace for my birthday. At 18, I had hidden under the covers, whispering into the phone, "Are you crying? I just said I liked you. Did that make you cry?" His voice was choked. "How could I let you say it first? I haven't even given you flowers or confessed yet." I teased him. "You've given me plenty of flowers." He wouldn't budge. "The flowers for a confession are different. They're not the same." I couldn't accept it. I refused to let us go so easily, until the day the paparazzi caught Francis and Nicole leaving a hotel together. Strangely, I was the calmest person of all. There was no heartbreaking rage, no bitter questioning. It was only now, in hindsight, that I realized, at that moment, I wasn't Francis's lover anymore. I had become Mrs. Sue. My first thought was to protect Jeanlun's stock price from taking a hit. I paid a hefty sum to suppress the news, ensuring that even now, no outlet dared to report the affair. For 2 whole years, Nicole was like a ghost that haunted us. An unrelenting thorn lodged between Francis and me. We fought. We tore each other apart, until we were both exhausted. Sometimes, when I looked at his furious, contorted face, I'd suddenly remember that long ago day when he had smiled at me and asked, "Sarah, will you marry me?" Time had blurred the face of the man I loved, leaving behind only someone I found hateful. Chapter 4. Nicole climbed into the passenger seat, her eyes trailing Francis's gaze. He was staring after the taillights of Sarah's car as it sped away. Feeling uneasy, Nicole tugged gently at his sleeve. "Fran, when do you plan to marry me?" Francis rested both hands on the steering wheel. At her question, he turned to look at her, a mocking smile tugging at his lips. "Marry you?" He reached out and tilted her chin, examining her as if she were an object. "You're the mistress. Don't you know that? We're worlds apart. If I married you today, people would laugh their heads off tomorrow." Nicole bristled. "When Sarah married you, wasn't she worlds apart from you too?" Starting the car, Francis replied coolly, "And what do you have to compare with her?" Nicole refused to believe she fell short. She had established herself in Hong Kong, built a reputation, and cultivated a career. Compared to the Sarah who had come south with nothing but her own determination, Nicole thought she was every bit as qualified now. Francis had knelt for Sarah back then, shaking the entire city with his resolve. Why couldn't he fight for her? Nicole, now, Francis, unaware of her thoughts, found the notion laughable that he would divorce Sarah for Nicole's sake. He was a man. In his lifetime, women came and went in an endless stream. Even if Sarah had occupied 12 years of his life, she was still just one woman. At that moment, Francis had no idea that one day, he would spend everything he had trying to reclaim those 12 years. Chapter 5. Before leaving Hong Kong, I visited Francis's mother, the formidable, commanding woman she was. In the early days, she truly didn't like me, refusing even to meet me. Francis's decision to marry me had been an act of defiance, nearly severing his ties with his family. Over time, things improved. Occasionally, she'd invite Francis to bring me home for a meal. It wasn't until the 3rd year of our marriage that I learned how much effort Francis had put into mending my relationship with her behind the scenes. Year after year, he implored his grandmother, the woman who had raised him, to speak on his behalf, recounting our hardships in Beijing and how I, a kind-hearted girl from the alley, had helped him through tough times. He painstakingly researched his mother's preferences, presenting acts of filial piety under my name and highlighting my achievements. He told her how I had consistently ranked first at Peking University, leading a team of over a dozen to launch a business even before graduating, qualities reminiscent of her own youth. He praised my decision to forego further studies abroad and follow him to Jinlong after graduation, a testament to my courage and commitment. I couldn't bear to see him struggle like that, lacking a family background that would satisfy the Su family. I drove myself relentlessly to grow into someone they could accept. The Su family didn't need someone to entertain them. They needed a daughter-in-law. So, despite her cold demeanor and frosty expressions, Francis's mother taught me, step by step, to become the capable Sarah I am today. She never acknowledged me outright, but she also never denied my status. This woman, who had sent Francis to Beijing at the age of 7 to ensure his survival, had spent decades without contact. Only after securing her dominance in Hong Kong, subduing the 2nd and 3rd wives along with their children, did she bring her only son back into her life. The house was resplendent with lights, the carpets immaculate. Elise, Francis's mother, stood with 3 incense sticks in hand, bowing reverently before the shrine of the goddess of mercy and the 8-faced god. When her prayers were complete, she turned to me. Time had left few marks on her face, though her eyes spoke of wisdom gained from weathering life's storms. You're not very clever. As long as I'm here, no one would dare take the position of Mrs. Su from you. I smiled faintly. Mom, I don't have the heart for it. I can't endure so much bitterness. I had once tried to convince myself to remain as Mrs. Su, standing tall amidst the chaos. But one day, I stumbled upon an old photo. It was from a Beijing autumn, the ground blanketed with golden ginkgo leaves. In the photo, Francis and I were separated by another person, looking as though we had no connection. But I remembered how we had secretly reached past that barrier, holding each other tightly, laughing as if we had found the rarest treasure in the world. It was then I realized I couldn't do it. Elise reminisced, something she rarely did. Francis is like his father. I never liked either of them much, but he's my son, and I can't bring myself to condemn him. He told me about the time in Beijing, when he was 15 and couldn't afford his grandmother's medical expenses. He begged everyone for help, but it was your years of saved-up New Year's money that got him through. When I heard you were divorcing him, I thought of the year he brought you to Hong Kong. He knelt and begged me to let him marry you. I refused, and he knelt for a day and a night. Still, I said no. He had so much pride, yet he cut ties with the family and started from scratch to be with you. Later, I asked him if he remembered kneeling here all those years ago. He didn't say a word. I stayed silent, occasionally offering a faint smile. Who could have predicted that after overcoming the seemingly insurmountable barriers of class and family, even earning the grudging acceptance of his mother, we would lose each other when the road ahead seemed brightest? I stood and hugged her, kissing her cheek as I said my goodbyes. She smiled faintly, as if looking through me into some distant place. As Francis's mother, I think you're being foolish, but as a woman, I admire you deeply and can only encourage you. She patted my hand. Sarah, as you embark on this new journey, I wish you a future as vast as the open road. Chapter 6. The next day, the Hong Kong tabloids splashed their front pages with bold, insinuating headlines. Golden Dragon couple splits, anchorwoman benefits? That evening, Francis showed up at my door, drunk and leaning heavily on his driver. Lucas. Lucas looked at me awkwardly, given Francis's status. It had been years since I'd seen him this intoxicated. Moments later, hurried footsteps followed. Nicole stormed in, unleashing a tirade. What kind of driving was that? Who told you to bring him here? Lucas defended himself. It wasn't me, Mr. Sue insisted. Every time he drinks, he asks for his wife. It's been that way for years. Francis mumbled. Sarah. I need water. Nicole's face twisted with embarrassment. She directed Lucas to help Francis away before turning back to me, straightening her posture. She declared, "You and Francis are divorced now. I hope you'll stop interfering in our lives." I looked at her coldly. Maybe you should figure out who's interfering with whom. Her expression darkened. This won't happen again. Don't think he still has feelings for you. Men don't recognize anyone when they're drunk. I shut the door in her face, cutting off her voice, lowering my gaze to my phone. I scrolled through the endless stream of messages I had answered throughout the day. Only one remained. I still hadn't decided how to respond. When are you coming back to Beijing? I'll pick you up. If we were talking about timing, Joel had come into my life earlier than Francis. He had disappeared for reasons unknown, only to reappear by chance, at which point I reintroduced him to Francis. Over the years, he had sent me holiday greetings, always concise, never intrusive. But today's message was different, the first unrelated to a holiday in all these years. Since my mother passed away in Hong Kong when I was 25, I had returned to Beijing only once a year to visit her grave. Joel was one of the few friends from Beijing with whom I'd maintained contact. After a brief reply to his message, I continued packing for my trip back to Beijing. Francis wouldn't find out I had left until a week later. He had assumed I was too deeply rooted in Hong Kong, with assets and enterprises I couldn't simply abandon. Leaving so suddenly seemed unthinkable to him. But he had forgotten, I had once come south with nothing to my name. Why couldn't I leave the same way now? Upon learning I had left, Francis remained composed. Ask her when she plans to return to Hong Kong. Chapter 7. As the plane touched down, I set foot on familiar soil once more. 7 years had passed, and the memories felt like a fleeting breeze, distant and scattered. I had deleted every contact associated with Francis, except for his mother. 7 years of connections and resources had been left behind in Hong Kong. But I wasn't afraid. Navigating society required two things, networks and capital. I knew how to bridge both, even though there was no urgent need to rush into the next chapter. I wasn't someone who could idle. The moment I stepped off the plane, my mind was already planning my next move. The driver respectfully took my luggage. Just as I was about to get into the car, I heard a bright, familiar voice behind me, Sarah. I turned to see her running toward me, throwing herself into my arms. I gently pushed her back. Angelica, what are you doing here? I had met Angelica when she was just 17. Her mother, addicted to gambling, had tricked her into signing a contract for an explicit film, hoping to capitalize on her growing beauty. Faced with crushing debt and her mother's coercion, Angelica nearly went through with it. At the last moment, she bolted and ran straight into my car. That was during my second year in Hong Kong, a time when I was struggling myself. But seeing a girl as radiant as a flower, I couldn't let her wilt. I gritted my teeth and paid the penalty to buy out her contract. Angelica looked up at me with her bright eyes. Sarah, you left without telling me. I couldn't find your flight details, so I've been camping out here waiting for you. I glanced at the luggage by her feet and reminded her, I don't plan to return to Hong Kong. Angelica had eventually entered the entertainment industry, partly because she loved acting, partly to repay the debt. But as is often the case in Hong Kong, actors earned pitifully small salaries, and she was still deeply in debt. I know, she chirped. That's why I'm here. Wherever you go, I go. When you were in Hong Kong, I stayed in Hong Kong. Now that you're back in Beijing, I'm staying here. As for work, I'll just start over. Whatever happens, I'm sticking with you. One day, I'll even take care of you in your old age. I couldn't help but laugh. Then, an idea struck me like lightning. I studied Angelica's face. Her features weren't striking, but her sweet, Fresh appearance had an undeniable charm. She wouldn't have stood a chance competing with the legendary beauties of the last century, like Rosamund Kwan or Michelle Reese. But times had changed. In today's economy, people craved relatability over unattainable glamour. Faces that brought a sense of warmth and joy were becoming the new standard of beauty. Back at Jinlong, I had overseen an entertainment company. I wasn't lacking in experience. The golden hues of the Beijing sunset painted the cityscape in a warm glow. Angelica. Standing against the light, my hair catching the orange rays, I asked, "How about I start a company to promote you?" Chapter 8. As the car exited the highway and entered the western section of the Second Ring Road, traffic came to a sudden halt due to road closures. We had no choice but to take a detour. I rested my phone on my lap when a man dressed in a shirt and black jacket stopped the car. His demeanor was respectful. "Miss Tang, Mr. Lin requests your presence." Angelica, sitting beside me, looked puzzled. "Who? What Mr. Lin?" The destination was a discreet private club. There, I saw Joel Lin for the first time in years. He stood by the window, broad shoulders framed by the light, one arm resting on the sill. His muscular frame exuded quiet strength. A cigarette dangled between his fingers, its glow flickering in the breeze. Hearing my arrival, he turned. It had been 7 or 8 years since I'd last seen him. The once wild and rebellious Joel had matured, his aura now a blend of composure and sharp intensity. Yet his gaze remained direct, almost overpoweringly so. "Sarah." He stubbed out the cigarette, his expression softening into a smile. "It's been a while. I hope you don't mind me arranging this welcome dinner." Joel, the heir to his family, was unlike the typical playboys who squandered their wealth. At 18, he had joined the military, later earning a graduate degree from the National Defense University. Through grit and determination, he had climbed to a position of real power, surpassing even his father. I had known Joel since childhood. He had been wild and unruly, constantly getting into trouble. He'd sneak out of the compound, climbing trees and stealing bird eggs. Back then, I would stand under the tree in my red cotton dress, arms outstretched to catch the fruits he threw down. I'd also keep watch, fretting, "Joel, be careful, don't fall." His most reckless stunt had been stealing his grandfather's Browning pistol to go fishing. He'd been caught and thoroughly beaten for it. The memory lightened the atmosphere, easing the initial awkwardness. I extended my hand. "You're a busy man. I wouldn't want to disturb you." Although I hadn't given Joel a clear answer to his text, it wasn't surprising he knew I was back. His connections were vast. Joel simply smiled without a word. Over dinner, he was composed and courteous, neither overly enthusiastic nor distant. His sharp eyes missed nothing, and his attention to detail was impeccable. When I mentioned wanting to start a media company, he even recommended 2 professionals from the industry. After the meal, as we drove home, Angelica couldn't stop gushing about him. "Sarah, that man's into you. I'm telling you, he's perfect. His looks alone could outshine any actor. And he's a million times better than that scumbag Francis. You should seriously consider him." I rubbed my temples. "Stop talking nonsense. We've been friends for years. That's all." I hadn't asked, but with Joel's family background, I assumed he was already married. His mother was known for her high standards, and only a handful of families in Beijing could meet her expectations. I wondered which family's daughter had become his match. Angelica wagged her finger with conviction. "The way he looks at you, it's like a tiger stalking a rose. Dangerous yet captivating." She had always loved gossip. Back in Hong Kong, she'd even been fined by her company for leading the charge in spreading rumors about a top actress. I dismissed her remarks as a joke and didn't give them much thought. Afterward, I focused all my energy on building the company. Fortunately, things progressed smoothly. From registration to recruitment, I handled everything personally. The company was located in the heart of Beijing, with my office on the 39th floor, offering a panoramic view of the central business district. Angelica, who had once dreamed of being Hong Kong's top actress, never achieved that goal. But through my small company, she finally got a stage to live out that dream. During this period, my interactions with Joel were limited. My attention was on the company, leaving little time for anything else. Joel, however, was in no hurry. Occasionally, He'd invite me to dinner. Through our interactions, I learned that he was still unmarried, an unusual status for someone of his background. Once, I accepted his invitation but forgot amidst my busy schedule. By the time I remembered, 2 hours had already passed. Rushing out of the office, I found him sitting alone in the company's reception area. I had no idea how long he'd been waiting. Other than moments like this, we rarely saw each other. Yet, whenever I encountered a challenge, help seemed to arrive almost immediately, though I didn't ask. I knew it was Joel working quietly behind the scenes. Chapter 9. When Francis and I divorced. He acted as though it was no big deal. Hong Kong was his territory. After all, as long as I remained there, I couldn't escape his grasp, or so he thought. It wasn't until later that he realized I had blocked and deleted him. Not just him, his assistant, secretary, housekeeper, and even the nanny were all blocked too. He had plenty of ways to make me answer the phone, but the 2 times he tried, I hung up the moment I heard his voice. That day, he visited Elise at her home, a villa in Kowloon Tong. Francis rarely visited unless necessary. Compared to his grandmother, he had little to say to his mother. This time, though, he had a purpose. He wanted Elise to call me and ask when I planned to return. Elise, wrapped in a luxurious shawl, sat at the far end of the long table, watching her son. Francis lounged casually on the sofa, one leg crossed over the other, idly flipping a gold lighter in his hand, a collector's piece worth 6 figures. It was treated as nothing more than a toy. His demeanor was relaxed, as though this was all an impulsive whim, a passing thought to pester me. When Elise called, I picked up after a single ring, my voice cool. Good afternoon, Auntie Lien. How have you been? Francis's gaze dropped. I didn't even bother to call her mom. Elise exchanged polite pleasantries but failed to broach the question of my return. It didn't take a genius to realize I had no intention of ever coming back. After hanging up, Francis didn't react. Looking at him now reminded Elise of his father. She waved him off impatiently. Get out of my house. I need to pray to the goddess of mercy and repent for my sins. Raising a fool like you? Others eat meat while I eat vegetables. Yet I still haven't atoned. As Francis stood, he squeezed her shoulder briefly, as if to console her. Lately, he had been preoccupied with the Asia-Pacific Business Alliance and had paid little attention to Beijing. At the door, his eyes caught a pair of scissors hanging on the wall. Taking them, he snipped away at a photo. The picture was of Sarah and Joel, with Joel's hand resting on her shoulder. Francis skillfully trimmed out Joel's hand and crumpled that half of the photo in his palm until it was a wrinkled mess. Even as a teenager, he had hated the way Joel looked at Sarah. Now, he still hated it, but at least Sarah didn't love Joel, even if they had known each other longer. Chapter 10. Within a few short months, my company was running smoothly. One day, as I left the meeting room, my phone rang. Miss Tang, you might want to send someone over. The property at Jinghe has been broken into. Jinghe was the house Francis and I had rented in Beijing during our university days. It was originally 2 separate apartments, but later, unable to let go of it, we bought and combined them into one. The car pulled up by the roadside. The massive ginkgo tree still stood where I remembered it, unchanged. The road from Jinghe to No. for high school carried all the memories of our youth. Francis used to wait downstairs for me 10 minutes early every morning. His bike ready, I'd climb on, and he'd hand me a warm, hard-boiled egg from his pocket. Later, when we attended separate universities, he waited for me at the gates every weekend so we could return to Jinghe together. We'd ride the bus through the bustling streets, dreaming of buying a house in Beijing after graduation, where we'd bring his grandmother and my mother to live together. And someday, he used to say, we'll have a daughter. My wife and daughter will be the happiest in the world. The lock on the door had been violently broken. When I pushed it open, I found Francis sitting on the sofa, intently reading. On his lap was a familiar book, a collection of love letters he had written to me during our younger years. Every page was filled with the ardent affection of his youth. When we moved out years ago, I had searched every corner for that book, crying when I couldn't find it. Francis had comforted me, promising he could write me love letters for the rest of his life. So losing one book didn't matter. I surveyed the room and scoffed. Don't you feel ashamed reading that now? through the thin fabric of his shirt. I saw the muscles in his back tighten for a brief moment, then freeze before finally breaking. After a moment, he set the book aside and stood. "Sarah, you've run too far. It's time to come back." I stepped away from his outstretched hand without hesitation. "If you had any sense, you'd know I hate you." I didn't just hate his infidelity. I hated how he had ruined the love I had cherished since I was 17. "Nicole is at your disposal. As am I. What else do you need?" His voice was soft. "Speaking of Nicole, the tabloids had been flooded with scandals about her. The media hounded her relentlessly, driving her to despair. Francis hadn't lifted a finger to help her. When reporters cornered him, asking about the affair, Francis had faced the cameras with a calm smile, as if confessing, "Yes, she was the mistress. Yes, I cheated." He bent down, looking me in the eye. "You went easy on Jinlong. You went easy on me. You still care." I met his gaze coldly. "You should thank your mother. If not for her, I would have torn you and Jinlong apart." To me, Jinlong didn't represent Francis. It represented Elisa's decades of struggle and triumph. "Sarah," he sighed, as though realizing something, "come back to Hong Kong. Let's remarry." It was hard not to suspect I had given him false hope, as if all he needed to do was repent, settle down briefly, and I would forgive him completely. "Francis, the day I decided to divorce you, I also decided never to remarry you. I only move forward. I don't revisit old mistakes, especially ones like you." I tapped the broken lock. "This house is in my name. You're trespassing. Go back to Hong Kong, or I'll call the police." Francis walked to the window and glanced down. There, Joel stood by my car, patiently waiting. He didn't come up, simply sheltering me with his hand as I got into the car. Before we drove off, Joel cast a casual glance upward. That one look met Francis's eyes dead on. There was no provocation, no emotion, just the expression of someone looking at garbage. Francis's hand, buried in his pocket, clenched tightly, veins bulging. For the first time, his calm facade shattered, and a storm of emotions surged within. Chapter 11. In the days that followed, Francis developed a peculiar habit. Every morning, dressed impeccably in a suit, he would show up at the 39th floor office. Denied entry. He simply sat in the reception area, calmly making phone calls and handling work. Angelica, upon spotting him, rolled her eyes dramatically. "What's that scumbag doing in Beijing?" I didn't even look up. "Ignore him." Back in Hong Kong, Francis rarely paid Angelica any attention. When she visited our house, she was always cautious and subdued around him. Now, seeing a familiar face every morning, Francis went so far as to greet her. "Good morning, Angelica." Angelica, unbothered, flipped him off. "Good morning. My ass. Are you here to block Sarah's money-making machine?" Francis didn't just stop by to sit. Flowers and jewelry arrived daily, causing curious glances from people passing through the office. At first, he seemed uncomfortable under the scrutiny, but after a few days, he let go of his reservations, shamelessly allowing himself to be watched. Thankfully, he had some boundaries and refrained from following me when Joel picked me up for evening galas. However, every time Joel came for me, Francis's gaze would turn icy and foreboding, like a predator sizing up his competition. One evening, Joel returned to the office to retrieve a bag I had left behind. As the elevator doors opened, Francis was still sitting in the reception area. Joel, carrying my purse, noticed Francis's eyes fixed on it and offered a sardonic comment. "The chairman of Jinlong, alone in Beijing. If he were to disappear without a trace, it would only be a matter of negligence. Of course, Sarah's too kind-hearted to allow that." He paused, gesturing at Francis with the bag. "But scumbag fits you to a T." Turning to leave, Joel was met with a derisive laugh. "And who do you think you are? You're just a tool, a distraction she's using to avoid me." "Don't flatter yourself." Joel merely smirked, dismissing him with a glance. He had no interest in engaging with someone as pitiful as Francis. Chapter 12. Francis didn't disappear in Beijing, but I heard a few days later that he'd been hospitalized. His assistant explained that Francis had been standing outside my apartment building when he saw a girl who bore an uncanny resemblance to me. It was dark, And without thinking, he pushed her out of the way of a falling flower pot. The pot shattered on his ankle. The assistant hesitantly asked if I could visit Francis at the hospital. I declined without hesitation and then picked up the phone. Get me a real estate agent. Francis's Achilles tendon had been severed by the impact of the flower pot. He underwent surgery that night and woke the next day to find only his assistant by his side. The doctor informed him that even after recovery, he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life and would need a cane. Francis glanced toward the door countless times, but I never appeared. A few days later, his assistant reported, "Mr. Su, the Jinghe property has been sold." Francis's faint hope shattered completely. His face grew cold, his expression cracking inch by inch. His lips twitched as he muttered, "Sold?" "Yes. The western half was sold." The western half was the part where Francis and his grandmother had lived. The other half belonged to my mother and me. Elise eventually sent a private jet to retrieve Francis, unwilling to let her son remain in Beijing, making a fool of himself. As he limped off the plane, leaning on his cane, Elise, wrapped in her shawl, sighed deeply. He approached her, then stopped and said, "Mom, she listens to you. Could you put in a word for me?" Elise's tone was indifferent. "You were determined to marry her, carefree about divorcing her, and now you shamelessly want to remarry her? I don't stoop that low." Seeing her son hang his head, she softened slightly, offering a gentle lie. "She's still angry. Live your life well, and maybe when she's no longer upset, she'll come back." Someone as sharp as Francis surely recognized the half-hearted reassurance, but he still nodded earnestly. "All right." Elise watched his limping figure fade into the distance, feeling he deserved every bit of it. Chapter 13. I didn't follow Francis's movements after our last encounter. Once I had wrapped up my company affairs, I decided to take a trip. Since my youth, I had dreamed of visiting Tibet, but life's many tangles had always held me back. Now, with time on my hands, I resolved to chase the dream I'd once envisioned. In April, I landed in Chengdu, planning to drive from there all the way into Tibet. On the morning of departure, the rolling hills and endless fields outside the car window were bathed in the glow of a scattered sunrise. The first stop on the 318 Sichuan-Tibet route was Chongqing, just half an hour's drive from Chengdu. I stayed there for a day, visiting the stunning Mujekuo Lake at 3,780 meters above sea level. It offered an awe-inspiring view of snow-capped mountains stretching endlessly into the horizon. Driving through Litong's Litong Old Town and the thousand-house Tibetan village, I stumbled upon a small tavern. There, I met a group of young travelers whose camaraderie was intoxicating, the kind that only a few shared drinks and toasts to youth can inspire. Afterward, we each set off on our respective journeys. Along the way, I met all kinds of people, families of three, lone adventurers like myself, and lovers braving the road's dust and trials together. I wasn't tied to any strict schedule. More often than not, I stopped whenever and wherever I wanted. Sometimes, I'd park the car by a vast meadow, simply standing still and letting time drift away. One day, as I drove toward Lingakuo to watch the sunrise over the golden peaks of Mount Gonga, Joel called, just as the sun crested the ridges, casting golden light across the mountains. His voice came through the line, "Sarah, happy birthday." I stared at the summit, my breath caught in my throat. At that moment, the world seemed to pause, leaving only the sound of my heartbeat. The vastness of the earth unfolded before me, and I felt so small within it. In that instant, I realized the complexities of life, the distractions of the mundane, all of it was fleeting. In the end, we all return to dust. What's lost will be found. What's past remains part of life's mosaic. Right and wrong, gains and losses, none of it matters. Living in the present and finding joy in the moment is what truly counts. Joel, standing amidst the mountains, I spoke into the vast expanse. "I'm waiting for you in Tibet." Between adults, emotions are as clear as day. Nothing like the veiled secrecy of youth. Though Joel hadn't joined me on this journey, his presence lingered in every step I took. At every stop, I felt his shadow. When a landslide temporarily blocked a section of the Chongqing Road, he wasn't with me, but I later learned he had been there, personally directing the evacuation. Joel arrived in Tibet earlier than I expected. The altitude sickness had slowed me down, so I often rested along the way. When I parked at my hotel, he opened the car door behind his sunglasses. I couldn't see his expression, but his lips curved in a faint smile. "You've done well." This journey with Joel was unhurried. Together, we visited the Potala Palace, Jokhang Temple, and Barker Street, witnessing devout pilgrims and their unwavering faith. The prayer flags fluttered in the wind, weaving stories of reincarnation and devotion. A famous saying came to mind: circling the mountains, rivers, and stupas, not for the next life, but to meet you along the way. The love of adults is often barefaced, needing no pretense, only the moment of collision to confirm it. Joel carried himself with restraint, his body honed by years in the military exuding strength. At 3,650 meters above sea level, he handled himself with care, every movement deliberate. One evening, as the snow-capped peaks towered outside our window, he kissed my collarbone, his breath hitching, muscles tense. He buried his face in my shoulder, murmuring my name over and over. "Sarah." His voice echoed through the Tibetan plateau, each word burning like fire against my skin. I raised my hand to wrap around his waist, gently patting his back. My gaze shifted to the snowy mountains outside the window. This solo pilgrimage of 10,000 kilometers had found its end. Life has no finish line. I am still me. Chapter 14. Joel drove us back to Beijing. I sat in the passenger seat, drowsy from the journey, while he held my hand the entire way. I've never doubted the sincerity of my love at 17, even if time has rendered it unrecognizable. Seasons change, people drift, but love at 17 is forever innocent. I chose to embrace my feelings and face all the possibilities of the future with courage and honesty. But just as I was about to nod in agreement, Joel's mother came to see me. This formidable woman, whom I had only seen once from a distance when she had forcibly taken Joel away at 14, still carried the same commanding air. With her privileged background, she looked down on everyone, including me. "Miss Tang, it's important to know one's place. Joel is on a rare vacation, and I've arranged for him to meet the Zhao family's daughter. He went. I thought you should know." Her words were measured and unhurried, delivered with the poise of someone used to being in control. She didn't need to say more. Her disapproval was enough to guarantee the Lin family would never accept me. I nodded. "I understand." That night, Joel came to see me. He was direct. "Don't believe what my mom said. I didn't go to any blind date." I hesitated but ultimately said, "Joel, I think we're not suited for each other." I had spent 7 years trying to win Frances's mother's approval, molding myself into the perfect Sioux daughter-in-law. I didn't have another 7 years to convince a different mother to accept me. To put it plainly, if I were still in my 20s and madly in love with Joel, perhaps I would have fought for us. But I'm not that girl anymore. Love and men are merely flavors of life now, not necessities. Life rarely aligns perfectly, the right person, at the right time. Joel, steadfast and unwavering, allowed his tears to fall. He composed himself, then spoke firmly. "Sarah, I'm not in my 20s anymore. No one dictates my life, not my marriage, not my choices. If I want to marry someone, I will. No one, not even my mother, can stop me. 7 years ago, if I had wanted, you wouldn't have left Beijing. But I respected your choice then, and I respect it now, whatever it may be. I've always believed that love is a rarity among the wealthy. Too often, I've seen heirs flit from one lover to the next, treating love as a fleeting whim. Yet Joel stood apart, his devotion resolute. Still, I shook my head. We're not meant to be. Prejudice is a mountain I'm unwilling to climb. I don't want to please anyone anymore. Joel lowered his eyes. You don't need to compromise or please anyone. One day, even my mother will seek you out. The night wind blew through my hair as I sighed. Resolute. Don't come to me again. Joel accepted my decision with grace. I'll wait for you. I'll wait until you're ready. Until the day you find your courage again. He seemed accustomed to waiting. Accustomed to loving only one person, like a whale returning to the sea or a bird to its nest. As for you, Sarah, you keep moving forward, chasing the wind and the moon, never looking back.